Este es un evento que nace de la alianza de cooperación entre el Sistema de Naciones Unidas en Guatemala y CentraRSE. Para conocer más sobre este gran evento, con ustedes el arquitecto Eric Michelén, presidente de este evento.
Muy buenos días, distinguidos funcionarios de gobierno, miembros del cuerpo diplomático, integrantes de la cooperación internacional, apreciables representantes de organizaciones civiles y empresariales, amigos de los medios de comunicación social del país. En nombre de la Junta Directiva de CentraRSE y sus 115 miembros que conforman nuestra organización, les doy a todos la más cordial bienvenida. Es un gran honor para mí inaugurar el encuentro Empresas Responsables con Guatemala, que organiza el Centro para la Responsabilidad Social Empresarial en conjunto con el Sistema de Naciones Unidas en Guatemala. El tema que abordaremos este año es la responsabilidad social empresarial como ruta para cumplir con los objetivos del desarrollo del milenio, ya que en CentraRSE creemos que las empresas son el agente de cambio y referentes del desarrollo sostenible para Guatemala. Las empresas vanguardistas que ya han incorporado la RSE en su visión compartirán con todos nosotros el modelo que han utilizado para contribuir a que el país se acerque a la consecución de estos objetivos y que los guatemaltecos tengamos la oportunidad de vivir en un lugar más digno que nos ofrezca una mejor calidad de vida a todos.
En nombre de CentraRSE y del Sistema de Naciones Unidas, es un gusto contar con ustedes y su presencia esta mañana. Tengo el honor de presentarles al doctor Lester Salamon, invitado especial de este encuentro empresarial tan importante.
Thank you, Mariana, and thank you all for welcoming me so warmly. I have traveled widely in Latin America, but I have never been in Guatemala, so this is a great opportunity for me that I am very appreciative of. I also want to express my thanks to René Mauricio Valdez from UNDP and the United Nations system for the really wonderful way they've reached out to me and involved me in this event. And thanks also to CentraRSE. So buenos dias to all of you. I'm delighted to be here to share the results of this work that I've done over the past several years on the corporate social responsibility movement in Latin America. The central message I want to convey to you really has two parts. One of them I think Eric has already alluded to, and that is the just vital importance of events like this and what you are doing here. I think we're all aware of the fact that the problems that are facing our world and your region are problems that no single sector can handle on its own, neither government, nor the civil society sector, nor the business sector. These are problems that are going to require the joint action of everybody. And the business sector has unique opportunities and unique skills and capabilities that it can bring to these tasks. We simply need to find the way to make those connections and to find the methodologies and methods through which the incredible skills and outlook and capacities of the business sector can be brought to bear on some of the serious problems that we face. And the second message that I want to convey to you is that something really quite extraordinary has been happening in this region, in this field. And in a way, the business community of Latin America, and I assume some of this is happening here, has created, in a way, its own special brand of corporate social responsibility that in many ways is ahead of some of the typical ways that this phenomenon has been thought through. And these contributions, I think, will certainly stand you well in your efforts to move this whole movement forward. But I think they have lessons for the entire world. And what I want to do in my remarks is try to introduce you to this phenomenon that I have seen emerge in this region and discuss what it suggests for all of you. I'm sure I don't have to remind you what has been going on in this field of corporate social responsibility across the region. Newspapers and news magazines like Exame in Brazil and La Nación in Colombia now issue regular rankings of corporations on their social responsibility performance. This has become a standard feature. There are awards for exemplary corporate social engagement all through the region. There are 8 award programs in Mexico alone. I'm sometimes concerned that we'll have more award programs than we'll have corporations available to receive them. Business schools across the region have introduced courses on corporate citizenship. One of them kind of facetiously calls what they're doing the pedagogy of the, which is, I think, an unfortunate term, but nevertheless captures what's happening in this field. Social impact reports have become a standard feature of corporate social and corporate annual reports. And state institutions like the Inter-America Bank have taken to organizing regular conferences every other year on corporate social engagement. Business leaders have even begun to portray their enterprises not simply as business firms, but as cultural transformation agencies promoting a new ethic of social and environmental sustainability. As one of the people I interviewed in the course of doing my book put it, it's hard for a company to avoid social responsibility in Latin America these days. In one sense, of course, this should not surprise any of us. It's been well known that Latin America has long been a profoundly philanthropic region, reflecting the deep religious convictions and commitments of many of the business leaders. But the truth is that the notion of philanthropia, as it's been practiced historically in this region, while often sizable and often inventive, has historically also been rather narrow in its focus. Going to turn on some slides if you'll allow me. It's been external to business. It's been individualistic in its character, each firm operating on its own. It's been paternalistic at times, not engaging people in the operation of the philanthropic work. It's been ad hoc and personalistic, few structures, few opportunities to know what the priorities of companies are, few procedures for going after grants and assistance. And it's been in a very narrow band of companies. And therefore its impact historically, and I'm talking about the historic pattern of philanthropy in this region, it hasn't had the impact that it could have and that it must have. But it seems pretty clear now that something more serious is going on. 5 years after the introduction of the concept of corporate social responsibility in Brazil, a survey carried out by IPEA, a very well-known Brazilian research organization, revealed that 59% of all private companies and 88% of all large companies, that is, companies with more than 500 employees, were contributing to some type of social activity. The IPEA researchers estimated that the cumulative contributions of these companies came to 4.7 billion real, or 0.4% of the GDP of Brazil. And to put that into context, in the United States, our corporate contributions amount to only 0.1% of the GDP. So that in 5 years from the launch of the corporate social responsibility movement in Brazil, Brazil's companies were contributing 4 times on a percentage basis what our companies in the U.S. Were contributing. There are at least 20 institutions in Brazil alone that are doing the work that CentraRSE is doing here in Guatemala. These include the American Chamber of Commerce, GIFE, the group of foundations. It includes the Brazilian Association of Toy Manufacturers, which has been a leader in social responsibility work. And it also includes Instituto Ethos, which has emerged as one of the leading promotion agencies for corporate social engagement, corporate social responsibility throughout the entire region. Research in Argentina revealed the same massive growth of corporate engagement and social activity. Every leading company in that country, according to recent research, has a significant corporate social engagement activity. There are conferences going on throughout the region, numerous conferences. Chile alone had 8 conferences of a significant sort like this just in 2006. And not surprisingly, all of this activity has attracted the media and a whole growing army of consultants. Mexico alone, for example, has 4 magazines devoted exclusively to corporate social responsibility. Why is this happening? I think you all probably know the reason. There are both demand factors that are stimulating the growth of corporate engagement, and there are also supply factors. On the demand side, a number of phenomena that I think have been responsible. First of all has been the whole growth in the 80s and 90s of the neoliberal economic policies, which had many positive impacts on the economy of this region, but also had some unfortunate impacts on the social protections available to citizens, with the result that inequalities intensified quite significantly. Brazil, for example, in 1999 had 54 million people, or about a third of its population, in poverty. And there was growing unrest in the country, as there has been throughout the region. And this led even many business leaders, including Oded Graju, who is the leader, the originator of Ethos, Instituto Ethos. He was then the head of the Brazilian toy manufacturers. And he recognized early on that something had to be done. As he put it to me in an interview, I had eyes and I could see the Brazilian realities. Something had to be done. And out of his sense of realization of the impact of the neoliberal policies on people in Brazil, he went forward to create Instituto Ethos, which has had an enormous impact in promoting the idea of corporate social responsibility in Brazil. A second factor moving in the same direction has been the enormous growth of the civil society sector in this region, all through the 1980s and 1990s, supported by intellectuals, by liberal priests in some countries, in some places by northern foundations, and in some places, such as Brazil, by the business community itself. And this movement, this democratization, had implications, I think, for the business community, essentially breaking the hold of elites who were resistant to the idea of engaging the problems of the poor and signaling a new commitment to social and political and economic rights for those on the bottom of Latin American society. Finally, a third factor that has helped to move this whole movement forward has been globalization. Globalization arrived here in the person of new business leaders who came heading companies, some of whom were partners in the privatization of the state-owned companies and were co-funders, co-venturists with local firms. Others arrived here simply as the result of globalization. And many of these companies from the outside brought with them patterns of corporate social responsibility that they had developed in their locations elsewhere, and they brought it into the Latin American reality in ways that have, I think, helped to propel this development forward. In addition to these demand factors, however, there have been a series of supply factors, and most significant here has been the emergence of a whole set of diffusion agents, which is what I would call CentraRSE. Organizations that, like CentraRSE, are propelling the whole concept of corporate social responsibility, bringing it to the attention of the business community, educating people about it, both in the business community and more broadly, and thereby extending the reach of this phenomenon into many, many more corporations. The granddaddy of them all is this Instituto Ethos that I mentioned in Brazil. Claims over 1,200 corporations as members now, and it's become an enormously powerful and influential force in Brazil and more generally. CEMEFE in Mexico has performed a similar function, and I could name many others, and I'm sure CentraRSE is taking its place as an example of a diffusion agent that will propel this whole concept forward. Because we can't expect the business community on its own to generate an understanding of this whole phenomenon. This is something that requires specialized assistance, it requires organized effort, and the diffusion agents have been crucial. Given the speed with which this whole phenomenon has emerged, however, there's at least some suspicion that this is not real, that it's a public relations effort, that it's more for publicity than it is for real change, real addressing of the problems that are being felt here. And so some years ago, about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, the Inter-American Foundation decided to launch a independent assessment of the state of corporate social engagement in this region. IAF, if you're not familiar with it, is a U.S. government-funded foundation that's been dedicated to supporting grassroots development effort in Latin America, particularly grassroots organizations. And about 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, we began to see the need to link the grassroots organizations with the business community and began to make investments in the promotion of that juncture between grassroots nonprofit organizations and business organizations. And they decided that they needed to do an assessment to see what was happening and what had been achieved. And for reasons that I'm not sure I quite understand, they approached me to carry out this assessment. And I decided to focus on 5 countries that were at varying levels of involvement in corporate social engagement work: Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Mexico. I took on a whole variety of methods of analysis. I reviewed the literature. I conducted over 100 interviews in the region. I commissioned local reports from scholars in each of these countries. I examined the Inter-America Foundation grant records, and I conducted a series of case studies on the ground to make sure that I was not being hoodwinked or didn't have the wool pulled over my eyes. And what I found, of course, was that yes, there was a good share of PR involved in the corporate social engagement movement in Latin America. This was not all substantive and not all powerful. But at the same time, I also came to what was for me a really surprising conclusion, because I found that Latin corporations were not only doing many useful things, but also they were inventing their own Latin version of corporate social engagement that's making important improvements on what has come to be known as the MBA approach to corporate social engagement, because it implies to corporate social responsibility the standard features of modern business training more generally. And I have nothing against standard business training, nor do I think that the standard MBA approach is inappropriate in many places of the world. The question is it really workable in the context of Latin America? And my conclusion was that it fell short, and it fell short in important ways. And further, I found that many companies had come to realize this and have made adjustments that are important adjustments that I want to be sure you are aware of, though I suspect you have come to the same conclusion. So what is the MBA approach? I think you're all somewhat familiar with it. It certainly emphasizes the need to proliferate the engagement with corporate social engagement. Otherwise, you have a serious free rider problem that everybody benefits, but only a few participate. And so one of the emphasis is to get beyond the very narrow pattern of business philanthropy that has been characteristic of the region. I have no quarrel with that line of argument. A second emphasis is on the need to professionalize corporate social engagement. It just has to be handled in a business-like way. There need to be goals, there need to be structures, there need to be a method to the way in which this all unfolds. The third approach, it follows from the second, and that is the need to be strategic, to not try to do everything, to choose objectives, to organize around those objectives, and to proceed in a strategic way. The fourth method, however, is one that begins to diverge from what I find in Latin America is feasible. And that is that the corporate social engagement approach always emphasizes the primacy of the business case, and particularly the primacy of the corporate profit as the guide to corporate social engagement. Now, nobody can quarrel with the idea that corporate social engagement is good for business. I think it clearly is, and that it can be documented. But the style of corporate social engagement that is recommended in the MBA approach leaves some things out. It basically says to the corporation, develop your strategic business plan. Then after you've developed your strategic business plan, ask yourself, what can I do philanthropically that advances my strategic business plan? And then, having done that, produce that result. It is totally top-down within the corporation and corporation out. Fortunately, one of my early interviews demonstrated to me very powerfully the limitation of this very logical MBA approach. I had the good fortune to interview Ramiro Santa, who works for the Hakol Oil Company in Colombia and has the unlikely title of leader of the stakeholder value team. Isn't that a strange title for a corporation? Leader of the stakeholder value team. So he told me that within 2 months of its takeover of this Colombian oil company in 1993, Royal Dutch Shell, which became the owner of Hakol Oil, found itself facing a strike by the workers in a community surrounding San Francisco, which is a small town south of Bogota, where the company had been drilling for a decade. And the community residents were simply fed up with the impact that this company was having on their community and the total failure of the company to have any relationship with the town and its citizens. So they went on strike. They prevented the company from gathering the oil, letting the workers through, and so forth. And so in response, Shell, being a good multinational company, knowing the principles of corporate social responsibility, put in place the standard MBA approach. They hired a consultant. They told the consultant to do some research, not on the ground. They did it by looking at statistics, and to come up with a plan that was consistent with the oil company's emphasis, which is on engineering, technology, skill levels. And so, of course, the consultants came back and they said, well, there's an obvious choice. We will build a school in this community. And there was then a big meeting of all the residents of the community. The leaders of the company came and they said, hello, we are from the Shell Oil Company. We're here to, or the Dutch Shell Oil Company. We're here to help you. We want to build a school. And they expected great applause, people standing up cheering. It was total silence in the room. Nobody even smiled. And the company couldn't understand it. Here we are. We've done exactly what we're supposed to do. We developed the strategy. We come up with a proposal. It's consistent with our strategy. We want to be known as somebody favoring education. What went wrong? And so they sent this young man, Santa, back to the town after the meeting a week later. And he began to sit down with the community leaders and he said, what happened? Why didn't you like what we were going to do? And the leadership of the community said, well, you don't understand. And the consultants didn't understand. We need a cemetery. And of course, the Royal Dutch Shell man was flabbergasted. Why in the world would you need a cemetery? And how would it look if our company is associated with a cemetery? And so the leaders of the community explained. They said, our children can't go to the school. Why can't they go to the school? We live in a violence area. There are two warring sides, and they're constantly at war with each other. And every other week, we find a body in the trails between the village and the school. And we can't touch the body, because if we give it a decent burial, the other side will think that we're favoring their opponents in this war that's going on, and they'll come and hassle our children, they'll come and hassle our town, and we'll have a terrible time for months. And so our children just don't go to school. We need a place where we can bury these bodies so that we can get them off the trails and we can get to school. Well, this was a pretty simple notion, but it set off a light bulb in the minds of the coal company. And it demonstrated that there was a crucial feature, one of several it turns out, that is simply overlooked in the MBA approach to corporate social responsibility. And that the Latin American reality, I think, brings into very stark focus. And that's the issue of the community role in corporate social engagement, a revolutionary thought that the community should have a role. Nowhere in this corporate model, the MBA model, was there any mention of it. In fact, the well-known writers, Michael Porter, Mark Kramer, two writers in Harvard Business Review, they caution people not to take the community into too much attention, because when they do, they will deviate from the business competitive strategy because the community doesn't understand what it is that is the strategy of the company, its economic strategy. So here we have a direct divergence from the corporate social engagement strategy preached in many of the business schools and the reality. The fact is that the MBA model of corporate social responsibility that is surfaced, and the key feature of it is one key feature of it is the active participation of community residents in the design of corporate social engagement activities.